How's it going? Welcome back, my wise ones, to a very special video today. In fact, it might just be one of the best days of all time, because the gaming gods might have blessed us with finally a new game that can topple Skyrim. The Skyrim killer might finally exist, and it might actually be a real thing.
I love it. I'm addicted to it. I don't know anything else.
Now it looks like the gaming community has lost their collective mind over Crimson Desert. The hype for this game has just reached an all-time high and it's gone absolutely insane. So check out my previous video as I set out some realistic expectations for this game, because it does seem that people have lost their collective mind for this game. And as I explained in my last video, it totally makes sense. I understand the need, the desire, the want for that immersive experience like we had with The Witcher 3, like we had with Skyrim or Red Dead Redemption. Games that truly feel alive, that truly capture, living in another world and embodying that character, living in that society, and, just doing whatever the hell you want. That true, absolute freedom, a proper open world game, not this live service slop that AAA gaming has been pushing down our throats for so long, not microtransaction slop, a true single player experience that feels like you have been transported. And this nails that in so many ways, but there are things about Crimson Desert that do need to be said, and I'm just trying to be objective here. I will tell you if I have a subjective opinion on something, because obviously, not everyone's personal taste is the same as mine. So let's get into the positives and negatives of this Crimson Desert review, and let's get straight into it. So first, you have to understand that Crimson Desert is not an RPG, okay? I'm pretty sure most people who have been paying attention at this point understand that, because the marketing and all the hype around this game, and like I said in my last video, most of the hype for this game has been set because of gamers' expectations. It's not like Starfield, where Todd Howard came out and, promised that this game is something amazing, when actually it was just showing snippets of what the game could potentially be. Crimson Desert, the videos that have been released by the team, by the developers, by the publishers, okay, they've all just shown snippets, okay? And this type of experience is best displayed in snippets, because that's what highlights it the best. But everything that you have seen is legit in the game. So, the expectations that are a little bit out of control are mostly from the gamers themselves. So I'm going to have a realistic, honest look at Crimson Desert and give you my honest Crimson Desert review.
Have you ever had a dream that you want him to do you so much you could do anything?
Crimson Desert is a character action game set in a massive, massive open world. And when I say massive, I mean giant, okay? This is insane. So, in my opinion, bigger isn't always better. That's what I keep telling myself anyway. Now, in recent times, most people have woken up to the fact that having a bloated open world with not much to do in the game world itself isn't that much of a fun time. It's basically a walking simulator where you go from one point to the next with not much going on. Ubisoft games have kind of truly shown that having empty giant worlds aren't that fun, with, very boring missions, A to B, collect this, kill a certain number of that, all of that kind of stuff. And game worlds, especially open world games, to feel truly alive, to feel immersive, they need to offer something much more. They need an actual convincing art style, aesthetic, graphics, however you want to call it, an interesting game world with lore and history, characters that feel alive. This is why Skyrim is still so successful to this day.
I'm tired, boss.
Yes, vintage.
And the same thing goes for games like The Witcher, okay? The combat not being the best in that game is something that people can debate. I personally don't think the combat is amazing, but what makes the world and the game so fantastic is the characters, it's the writing, it's the stories, the quests that actually have interesting dilemmas to them. That is what makes that type of game so special. Crimson Desert is a different type of experience. First, you need to understand this. It is a character action game, and it's not an RPG. It's not heavily focused on connected, deep personal relationships like Baldur's Gate or anything like that. It's a sprawling open world in which you fight bosses, clear out camps, manage your resources, build up your own camp, expand, and raid dungeons, explore different places to unlock artifacts, to level up, to do other missions like bounty hunting, treasure hunts, all of this kind of stuff. And a lot of the A to B stuff is going to be recycled. But what's actually in the game world is very interesting, because the environment in this game world is probably the best I've seen in a very long time. There are secrets to discover in this game world, that's for sure. Exploration is pretty decent for the most part. It doesn't hold your hand that much, which I really appreciate, but the actual world itself doesn't feel as alive as I would like. It's nowhere near, Red Dead Redemption level, or, something like Baldur's Gate, where NPCs you can interact with. Some NPCs you can't even actually hurt or damage. There is a crime system, which I'll talk about later, but a lot of the NPCs are visual fillers. They don't actually serve a real purpose, and this is the thing. It looks great on, marketing material in videos, but when playing a game, you need to feel immersed. At least that's what I need when I'm playing an open world game like this. And there's something about the mission structure, the quests in this, that just falls a little bit flat. But in saying that, there's so much to love about this. That's why I'm going to get into all of these positives and negatives. This is from everything that I've been playing at Tokyo Game Show, the press event. There was a massive, massive booth there where I got to play, a lot of hands-on time with this, and this was for the press days, journalists, all that kind of stuff. And even then, there was a giant queue for this booth because so many people wanted to play this game, and for good reason, because we haven't had a game like this in such a long time. We've wanted something to capture that same sense of wonder and magic and, storytelling that really transport us and, make us question, different aspects of our own life, roleplay different characters. That's what people want, but it isn't that, okay? This isn't a Witcher game. This isn't Skyrim, okay? This isn't a deep thematic RPG like Baldur's Gate. This is Dragon's Dogma and aspects from The Legend of Zelda, a little bit of Red Dead Redemption, and Assassin's Creed. All had like some kind of weird, fucked up baby, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful in its own way. So let's get into it. So now I've got all that out of the way, I do hope you enjoyed this Crimson Desert review based on all the early access stuff. Become a Wise One today, that really does mean absolutely everything to me. Give the video a like. I really put a lot of hard work into my channel and content. It's the only thing that I'm passionate about, so please do support this channel, subscribe, join this community, get involved. If you love analyzing games on a deeper level, analyzing them, looking at thematics, philosophical videos, music, everything like that, that's what I'm passionate about. Real creativity, not any of this AI slop bullshit, then please do subscribe and check out my music on Spotify. That would really be awesome of you. Now let's get straight into the positives and negatives. What happened to my voice? Okay, so the first positive that I want to highlight in this Crimson Desert review is simply the technology, okay? The technology on offer here is kind of crazy. This finally feels like the next-gen video game that has been promised to us since, this new generation of consoles and all this kind of stuff. From parallax textures that look absolutely beautiful, to the lighting, ray tracing feeling much more natural compared to other games, no Unreal Engine slop. There are some bugs, there's some artifacts, all of this kind of stuff. I would recommend you go watch some analysis on the graphics if you're interested in all that kind of thing. But what I care about, because I'm a goddamn creep when it comes to this kind of stuff, I love physics in video games.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And this game messes with physics a lot. It messes with how you traverse through mist, with, rain and thunder effects and all this kind of stuff, wind impacting everything realistically, puddles being left on the ground after a thunderstorm that you actually have to, traverse differently when you're climbing. The weather will impact, when you're climbing as well, with how well you climb and stuff like that. and just the water effects, all of that kind of stuff. Physics in combat, like chucking enemies and them reacting realistically, vandalism in the game, all of this kind of stuff adds to a level of immersion that is very good. And I love to see that in video games. But what I wish was done with these systems, because they're in the game, there needs to be actual mechanics to utilize them better. Instead of having a surface level wanted system that really doesn't matter at the end of the day. Death also doesn't really matter that much, which is kind of sad. It just, kind of resets to where you were previously. There needs to be more, deeper, like, punishment levels, or like a difficulty slider similar to that of Dragon's Dogma 2, where that was quite punishing for some people. I like that kind of thing, so there needs to be that option. And I'm not a graphics person. It's all about the art style and the actual mechanics, and the mechanics here are cool as hell, even when it comes to do with puzzle solving. You can solve things with, like arranging the placement of certain objects by using tools that you unlock, similar to Zelda, where it's kind of physics-based puzzles and elements and stuff like that, like setting things on fire, for example, like reflecting the light from your shield to burn something, all of this kind of cool stuff, or your sword, and using all of these tools to your advantage. And it's very tactile. It's very tactile if you think about games like Red Dead Redemption 2, where you have to actually open a wheel and select different objects and stuff like that to use in the world. It's very much that type of game, okay?
I'm a nerd. So am I!
But you have to understand, like I said, that this is not an RPG, so don't expect leveling up, okay? Or anything like that. There's a big skill tree, but it's kind of simple in its design. But in how much you want to drill into a certain skill, there is the depth to be found, okay? That is where you can find the depth, is by drilling into a particular kind of node of that skill tree to unlock more and more moves for that. Similar to like a modded playthrough of Skyrim or something like that, where perk trees are overhauled and you can add even more stuff. Sorry if I discuss that sometimes, because I've been modding the hell out of Skyrim recently, and I've been enjoying that a lot. This almost feels like a modded version of Skyrim. Like, I can't wait to see what mods do to this game in the future, if that's allowed, and if that's possible.
Isn't that odd now? Yeah. After all, why not? Why shouldn't I keep it?
But it doesn't have the same world building or the same historic, weight and just that kind of mystical feeling that the Elder Scrolls has. So don't go in expecting that, because I do think that the world itself is lacking a little bit. It's got a very interesting mixture of, a kind of built up civilization with mechs and robots. There's even, electricity in certain places. There's guns. The fantasy of it isn't as thematically grounded, or it's not as well thought out, I would say. Like the game world, the universe, there's not going to be many moral dilemmas if you're a person like me who likes the kind of deeper stuff. But the gameplay on offer here, and just the charming nature of the world, is still very fun to explore. It does remind me a lot of Dragon's Dogma 2 in some ways. So instead of leveling up and creating your own character like an RPG game, even though that's what many people thought this game was, it's much more of a character action game where you'll be pulling off crazy combos, slam dunking enemies, pulling off crazy physics, drifting your horse around the open world. It's that kind of chaotic fun, okay? So it's a little bit different. If you've ever played Black Desert Online, it's very similar to that, as it is made by the same developers, and they are an MMO studio first. This is their first proper single player experience, and that also goes into some of the quest design, as I'll talk about later, which isn't the best, sadly. But the world itself does feel alive, especially with all of this new technology. I would say it does a good job of pulling these aspects off. But NPCs that you meet in the world, like I said, you can't actually damage some of them. Some of them are just visual, NPCs that literally have nothing to say. There's a greeting mechanic, but they just say like one-liners to you, nothing that incredible. And it does make some of the world feel a little bit lifeless, unless if you meet an actual quest giver or, a merchant or stuff like that. The world itself does feel almost like The Witcher 3, in the big open areas. You have tons of these NPCs that you can't really interact with. It's basically the whole game world is like that. There's not as many interactable characters, whereas The Witcher 3 balances that out nicely with deep characters that you can interact with many different branching story paths and stuff like that. It does have those moments, it does have big cinematic moments and stuff like that with the main story, but it's mostly about fighting bosses, clearing camps, and basically building your clan up and making them stronger and better throughout time. And basically the main story is you are discovering, you know, the true potential of this kind of otherworldly, you know, powers and artifacts that I can't really talk about, but that's, you know, something I've only seen a very little of. That's basically how you get your, you know, crazy powers, is by finding these different artifacts and leveling up that way your health, your stamina, or if you want more spirit powers and these crazy moves, you can also put you know, kind of skill points into that. And that's my general opinion on the game world itself, where it doesn't feel like you've actually killed a character many times, you know, if you're just attacking NPCs or something. Whereas in a game like Red Dead Redemption or something like that, they feel much more alive, okay? That's a point I just wanted to stress, because it is, you know, a big deal for some people like me. For some people, you just want a massive open world with tons of things to do in there, with beautiful graphics, amazing technology, and it's got all of that and so much more. I just had to say that right off the bat.
Goddamn right.
So that is definitely a bit of a negative and positive for some people, the world aspect, I would say. But now let's get into the positive, okay, which is the combat of this gameplay. Like I said, this is very much character action, very frantic, very fast, especially when you level up, especially later on in the game. It's one of those games that gets better as you play. In fact, the end game is probably much more satisfying than the beginning of the game, but by that point it won't be feeling as fresh. But that's when your builds really come into their own. You have all of these different spirit abilities, you have all of these tools, like I said, for solving puzzles, but also actually using in the environment and with combat as well. So there's so much of that later on as you progress throughout the game. And it's very much that character action experience where you're kind of juggling enemies, almost Devil May Cry-esque in some aspects, like when you're really pulling off these crazy moves. But it is much more grounded, you know, like Dragon's Dogma 2. It's got that weighty physics to it, not as slow or weighty or as immersive as that game, and I really love that personally. A much more slower, weighty experience where you have to wind up each attack. This is much more flashy, but honestly, the kind of balance of it feeling weighty but flashy at the same time actually works very well. And if you've ever played Black Desert, you'll kind of know what I mean, but it's more weighty than that. And now on to the next positive, and I do think this is a major positive overall. You will also be unlocking artifacts by doing this in the game. It's very important, and that is solving puzzles, okay? Now this takes place in dungeons, in, you know, places you discover like caves and stuff like that, but also up in the skies and all of this kind of stuff. So you need to be constantly on the lookout for solving these different puzzles, and, you know, you will unlock different tools to solve these puzzles. But a lot of them do feel very much like Zelda inspired, I would say. The best way I would describe it is it reminds me of something like Hogwarts Legacy, where you have these kind of elemental puzzles, or these kind of, you know, physics-based puzzles where you have to move something around to slide something into place, or you have to use, you know, some of your weapons or some of your tools to actually unlock that puzzle. It's very much physics-based, and I really love that kind of system and puzzle design. It doesn't really get boring so far, but of course there's not going to be endless variation, I imagine. But there is good puzzles in this, and that is a lot of fun as well. So that's something to look forward to if you are a fan of that kind of Hogwarts Legacy / Zelda style of puzzle design. I would say you're going to like it. It's not like hand-holdy too much, and usually he's not going to blurt out the answer. But it's not really a mystery type of puzzle where you have to like kind of, you know, comb through pages of information to solve something. It's very much like mechanical, if that makes sense.
What?
Now, I do hope you're enjoying this Crimson Desert review. Like I said, this is all based on the early access stuff, but I feel like it's very important to address what this game actually is, to set real expectations, to talk about the early gameplay, what I'm allowed to discuss, because a lot of gaming today is marketing hype.
That's the spirit of Mario Supreme, Christmas Day, Mario Supreme, Dream Big, Mario Supreme, Christmas Day.
And if you'd like to cut through all of that BS, then please do subscribe to this channel, join this community. So the next point I would say is a bit of a negative, and this might be a subjective bias, okay? So some people might find that the storytelling here isn't that bad, and some of the voice acting is actually pretty good. And honestly, the more I spend with the characters, I'm sure I'll feel a little bit more emotional towards them, but a lot of the times they aren't that interesting. The bosses and the world itself is absolutely incredible. This is what made me fall in love with Dragon's Dogma 2. Crimson Desert has that magic, and it has better exploration, a better world that feels more immersive than Dragon's Dogma. Maybe the combat, I don't like it as much, but for people who like much more flashy, like rewarding combat where there's much more build variation, I think you're gonna enjoy this a hell of a lot more. So it's got that nailed down so well, but the themes and the world itself is not as interesting. You're not gonna be combing through, like the history or learning about different gods or anything like that. So it's a very different type of fantasy. That's why I don't think it's going to fill that, hunger that a lot of Skyrim players have.
I'm tired, boss.
And the art style, like I said, it's graphically beautiful. It does have some amazing architecture. The cities look amazing as well. But there is a lot of like thrown together ideas, I would say, in Crimson Desert. And it's going for a Western fantasy art style without truly understanding the kind of roots of Western fantasy in some ways. And there's always going to be, a kind of race or faction that has much more superior technology. Usually it's like the dwarfs or something like that in generic Western fantasy. But with this game, it does kind of throw you off a little bit when you are playing as a giant robot. It's a lot of fun, but there is a little bit of, it just feels a little bit convoluted, I guess you could say. But for some people, that might be a unique charm to it, like discovering a city that's actually powered by electricity. I'm not going to say too much, but there's stuff like that out there that's pretty cool to discover. But that leads me on to my next thing, which is a positive, and that is just the breadth and like detail in this world when it comes to the landscape. When you have a game this big, it's not good, okay, if it's just empty space. No one wants that, okay? They want interesting locations, and you can't expect there to be something to be found every like 10 minutes of traveling. A lot of open world games have, a random discovery to be found. Obviously, it's not like that, okay? Expect a lot of, open areas where there isn't much to find, maybe a few enemies, stuff like that. So for people who have ADHD brain or want instant dopamine, you can't expect to find something around every single corner. And honestly, I do prefer a tighter game world where there's more interesting things to discover. But when you do discover something, it's truly incredible. And the variation in landscape from, like rainforests to boggy marshes to the deserts to snowy peaks and mountains, with all of them having realistic weather and physics, like that shit is insane. And like flying around this world on a dragon, or just flying around with your gliding abilities, like there's so much freedom that this game gives you that it's hard not to fall in love with what it offers. Now that brings me on to my next point, and that is basically the storytelling in this game isn't the most interesting, okay? Like I said, the puzzles, the interactable elements, that's all very good, and I like the fact that you can even go into first person and, like observe things, and you have this learning ability as well. That's how you learn different skills, and, as you unlock different abilities, like from simple things to like fishing, and then absorbing the boss's power after you defeat them. All of this stuff is so cool, okay? I've got to stress that. But when it comes to the actual quest design themselves, okay, when it comes to the actual questing, it's a very mixed bag. You're gonna get some MMO type style missions where it's very much collect this resource, go kill this person, clear out this camp, cook this recipe or something like that. But then there are quests that are way more cool, and you have to fight a giant boss at the end. You've got to go discover something, and the story missions are usually a little bit cinematic, but they're a little bit more on rails, similar to kind of like Red Dead Redemption in that regard. So the perfect balance is when you get like a tailored quest that really allows you to explore something, not these kind of filler quests. But because this game is coming from an MMO developer, you have to expect that some of the quests are going to be generic, and not all of them are going to be that interesting. Now, a huge positive in this game is, of course, the bosses and the side activities. Like I said, you will be able to interact with quite a lot of stuff in this world for the most part. Now, some of the bosses in this game are almost as crazy as Dragon's Dogma 2 or like Dark Souls bosses, or even Shadow of the Colossus, like where you actually have to utilize physics. You can like climb on them, you can do all of this kind of crazy stuff. So the bosses in this are really fantastic from the few ones that I have seen, and then you unlock their powers as you progress, which I really like.
Shut up and take my money!
And for people who like, you know, the kind of micromanagement, the doing everything in a world type deal, there is that in this game as well. You know, they've got the Assassin's Creed kind of Brotherhood management system where you have to manage your troops and, you know, kind of build up your camp and all that kind of stuff. Now, you don't have to mess with all of these systems. They are kind of optional, I would say, but they do exist. And at times it does feel like this game is trying to do too much. Like, it doesn't do anything perfectly, but it does so many different things, you'll easily get distracted with a new mechanic. So if you think about other great RPGs or open world games, even though this is not an RPG, but it's replicating some of those ideas, you have to understand that some aspects of this game are kind of undercooked and they aren't as interesting, but because there's so much to engage with, you'll be kind of bouncing around different mechanics constantly, so there's always something new to distract you. Now this brings me on to the next negative point. Like I said, consequences in this world don't truly matter. And I understand maybe it doesn't need to because this is not an RPG, but in a massive open world game like this with interactable elements, having different factions and stuff like that, none of it truly matters that much. Like when you do a quest line for a certain faction, it's basically just going to net you better loot, better gear and all this kind of stuff. There's no like a morality system or anything like that, and maybe there doesn't need to be. The same thing with crime and punishment, like it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, like I said, with death or anything like that. And for some main quest lines, like some stuff that maybe you don't want to engage with, you will be forced to do. So for example, there's a lot of resource management in this, like collecting resources to then make your camp more, you know, stronger, because that is very important in this game, is to progress your clan to make them stronger throughout the whole experience. So there are some resource grind, and that is very MMO inspired, and I'm not a huge fan of that in single player games, to be honest.
What?
But movement in this game world just feels so goddamn good. The physics, the combat, all of this just feels so good. Like it always feels like you're progressing your character, so that's why it feels satisfying, because you're always getting stronger, there's always a new boss to discover, always a new location to explore, and most of the time, even if you're exploring only for gameplay reasons, like the gameplay itself is just so solid that it keeps that, you know, perfect feedback loop of discovering something new and getting stronger because of it, finding sometimes an interesting quest or interactable elements. But for me, there does need to be a little bit more of a narrative reason as to why I'm doing these certain things. Like in games where you do go out and you explore the world, like in Red Dead Redemption 2, for me it's also because, you know, the world itself feels alive. Like, you know, meeting different NPCs has some consequence, you know, and it feels like you're meeting other characters. The only big negative I really have for Crimson Desert, for the most part, is that it doesn't truly feel like an immersive game world. Like it has immersive aspects, but it just doesn't capture that same essence as, you know, these magnum opus games that I've compared it to, in my opinion. But for some people, I'm sure it will. Now that brings me on to another point that is a bit of a negative, and I am, you know, giving you a fair amount of positives and negatives. Overall, this game is fantastic, and basically, if you're a fan of open world games, fantasy games, or, you know, good character action games, you're gonna love this, okay? But I just think it's, you know, reasonable to be fair and objective. Like, there's no reason to hype up a game, gas it up, and pretend everything's perfect about it. Like, obviously no game is perfect, and it's fair to look at some aspects that I think could be improved. So the controls in this game are not fantastic, okay? Overall, they're very clunky, and that's because it is, you know, messing around with a lot of different mechanics, and I really do commend them for that, because that's what gaming has lacked for so long, is playing around with different systems, playing around with different mechanics, and it does definitely have that, but it does make some of the movement, some of the combat, if you don't know what you're doing, quite clumsy. Even just, you know, like sprinting or climbing certain objects or interacting with your tools, because remember, like I said, everything is very tactile. It does, you know, take a lot to memorize, and some people might get frustrated with just how bad the controls are to begin with. Now, if you are a fan of gear and collecting, you know, different type of weapons and they all function differently. This is going to be a game for you. This is what I love so much about Skyrim, is finding the rare weapons and items and, you know, truly kitting yourself out because you have, you know, different equipment slots, you know, not just an overall armor piece. You have, you know, everything down to your boots, to your gloves, to what you're wearing, like, you know, anything. It has all of that. It's very much gear focused, so expect to find, you know, rare weapons and, you know, just kitting yourself out because, like I said, it's more about the gear that you have that makes you powerful, and your abilities, that's it. It's not, you know, like based on skills and stats or anything like that, because this is not a fantasy RPG. And then finally, we just have to discuss some optimization issues. So from what I've seen from, you know, the press access, is basically there is a lot of pop-in at times. And basically that doesn't really matter much, but there are, you know, like artifacts when it comes to this engine, because this engine has not been seen before, and I really do like it. Like, maybe they used it for Black Desert, but it's kind of built purely for this game, and this is what allows the draw distance to look absolutely stunning. But it does have some, you know, problems, obviously. But for the most part, like, it's very good, but there are noticeable pop-in and, you know, other issues with the game, but nothing like game breaking. So there you go, my wise ones. That is the Crimson Desert review based on all the early access stuff that I've managed to see at press events and all that stuff. Now, I honestly think that this is a game that's going to hook many people. Please do watch my other video, because I go into much more about the discussion around what this game is, around the gaming industry, like how long it's been since we had a game like this, and what type of player is going to love this, you know, for people who love Zelda or Assassin's Creed, and, you know, that type of experience, or even Dragon's Dogma 2 to some extent. But then there's also the people who, like me, who care much more about, you know, the kind of thematic storytelling, the morality, karma-based systems in RPG, and the philosophical implications to all of this kind of stuff that gaming allows you to tell your own story. So it's not a game that does everything. Like, people were expecting this to be the game to end all games. Like, it tries to do so much, and in trying to do so much, it does some things very badly, or not badly, but just very surface level, I would say. And then it does some other things absolutely incredibly well, like I said, with the game world feeling like so beautifully alive when it comes to the visual variation, the physical systems, the different mechanics going on in the background, but not so much in the story department and the characters and world building and all this kind of stuff. But there's going to be a lot of people who love this game. So would I recommend you play Crimson Desert? Yes, this is one of the rare examples of AAA gaming doing something well and doing something unique. And I honestly think that this is going to be a special game, and it truly is a next-gen game, and it's a good step forward for the industry, because this points to, again, other studios that this is the type of experience that we want. And honestly, it does so many things that I think are incredible. And hopefully, you know, over time, we get even better systems in place of some of the surface level stuff. But honestly, right now, this game is very good. And if you love an action fantasy game like I do, fighting big bosses, all that stuff, this is kind of what Dragon's Dogma 2 should have been. Even though I love that game, a lot of people weren't happy with it. I think that this is the perfect blend for, you know, people who don't necessarily need all of the hardcore elements that Dragon's Dogma 2 has, but it has that amazing combat, that world that is much more, you know, living and breathing, and has much better exploration, all of this kind of stuff. But it's not the Skyrim killer that everyone's been waiting for, but it is finally nice to get another game similar in scale and vibes and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for watching, my wise ones. I've been rambling long enough. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll be seeing you in the next video. Peace out. And also, don't forget to check out my new album on Spotify. My new synth soundtrack is coming out very shortly, by the end of this month. It's not like music you've ever heard before. It's a very different type of blend of electronica music, where I blend many different genres together. So check it out. I would appreciate it a lot. And I'll be seeing you next time.